Okay, Cassie, looks like we have everybody.
Yes, sounds good. I'm about to get started. Hello, and welcome to the Healthcare Market Oversight Program Rules Advisory Committee meeting. Um, next slide, please. As you may have seen when you joined, this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be posted online. Closed caption is available. A transcriber is also attending this meeting. He will produce a written transcript after. I do request that when speaking, please state your name before making a comment and speak as clearly as possible to ensure an accurate transcription. And then please keep your microphone on mute until it's your turn to speak to reduce outside noises and raise your hand so we can know that it's your turn. Next slide, please. All right. So for attendance, if you are a member of the RAC, please enter your name and organization into the chat. The agenda is posted online, but we will do a brief overview of the HCMO program. We'll go over the RAC process and what that means, and we will review and discuss proposed rule changes. Public comment will be held around 11:45, and we will have a wrap up and next step. If at any point during this meeting you need technical assistance, please send a direct message to Melissa. My name is Kathy. I will handle the first part of the meeting. With that, we'll hand it over to Sarah to go over the rule changes later on. Our role for today's meeting, OHA staff will present information about HCMO, the RAC, and the proposed rule changes. We will also facilitate the meeting. RAC members, again, the roster is posted online and linked in the chat, but RAC members will provide input on the HCMO draft rules, suggest additional changes to the rules, and like I said, Sarah will guide you through that process later. If you're a member of the public and not part of the RAC roster, you're able to provide additional input during public comment period, which will be towards the end of the meeting. And again, anyone, RAC members and the public can submit comments via email, public comment form, and we also have voicemail at any time during this process, and we'll go over that more throughout the meeting. So for public comment for rulemaking is open until the rulemaking process ends. So this is tentatively February 2026 at the earliest, potentially into March 2026. This meeting does include time for public comment. We are hosting a second RAC meeting on November 20th. And so we ask that if you want your comment to be considered for this meeting and for those red lines, to please submit them no later than Thursday, November 13th, 2025. You can email your comment to hcmo.info@osha.oregon.gov, or again, you can do a form or a voicemail. And we ask that you do not include private or sensitive information in your comments, since these will be posted publicly online. Next slide, please. So to start, we're going to go over very quickly a high-level overview of the Oregon Healthcare Market Oversight Program. Sometimes you'll hear me refer to it as HCMO. Next slide. Thank you. So through the Healthcare Market Oversight Program, OSHA reviewed proposed healthcare business deals to make sure they support statewide goals related to cost, equity, access, and quality. So through this, we aim to promote transparency. So you'll see that we post notices and reports so that communities have information about planned transactions. We support statewide priorities. So HCMO ensures that healthcare deals support statewide goals related to affordable care and eliminating inequity. And then we also aim to monitor and study impact. So HCMO tracks deals in Oregon and evaluates how they may affect people. And OHA does look at and report on the impact of healthcare consolidation in Oregon. Next slide, please. So what authority does OHA have? So each proposed deal that is reviewable, OHA may approve, approve a condition, or disapprove. For deals that involve a domestic health insurer, OHA provides a recommendation to the Division of Consumer and Business Services, also known as DCBS, to make the final decision. Next slide, please. A very high level of the HCMO review process. So healthcare entities notice that they are planning a reviewable transaction. HCMO then reviews the transaction and the potential impact. At the same time, HCMO invites public comment and may engage other experts. HCMO then issues a decision, and then if the decision is approved or approved a condition, HCMO conducts follow-up reviews 1, 2, and 5 years after closing. And I do want to note that this is only specific to notices of material change transaction. The emergency exemption process is different. Next slide, please. So during reviews, HCMO looks at how a proposed transaction could affect healthcare costs, quality of care, market consolidation, access to care, and health equity. Next slide, please. Oh, go back. Okay, thank you. HCMO is guided by statute, rule, and other frameworks. So today we're seeking feedback to help inform the administrative rule, but we may also hear feedback that relates more towards statute, guiding principles, and sub-regulatory guidance, such as program operation. We'll take all that into account accordingly. I do want to note that feedback was provided for the OHPB guiding principles and framework that was approved, and we have the version posted online as well. And all of this will be found in the chat. Today, we're going to go over the Rules Advisory Committee process. Next slide. Okay. So what are the Rules Advisory Committee? So a RAC is used to seek input to maximum extent possible during the development of the proposed rulemaking prior to giving notice of intent to adopt, amend, or repeal an administrative rule. A RAC allows the public and interested parties to provide input and suggestions during the development of new rules, amendment, or repeal of existing rules, and the fiscal impact of the proposed rulemaking. The RAC's role is advisory, and consensus is not necessary. Any individual is welcome to attend, observe, and listen to this RAC meeting, and this meeting does include time for the public to provide comment. More information about the role of the RAC member for HCMO can be found online in the RAC guidance, which is posted in the chat as well. Next slide, please. So for the proposed 2025 HCMO RAC meeting, so today we're at meeting number 1. We're going to go over program and rulemaking background and review and discuss the suggested rule changes for the first draft. For the second meeting, which we held on November 20th, we're going to look at input received from today through November 13th, 2025. We're going to have a continued discussion of the rule changes. We will also review and discuss the revised fee schedule, and then review and approve a statement of need and fiscal impact, the racial equity impact statement, and then the final edits to rule will be submitted to the Secretary of State with another round opportunity for feedback in 2026. This is next slide, please. A high-level tentative rulemaking timeline is the RAC meetings will be held in November. February and March will be the rules hearing, along with the last day for public comment, pending the date of the rules hearing. And then the rules effective date is looking like April 2026. Next slide, please. So this is actually our 4th iteration of HCMO rulemaking. So in 2021, initial rulemaking took place after establishing legislation. In 2022, we held rulemaking to add and clarify definition, details about the community review boards, and the 2023 fee schedule. And 2024, rule changes were made to clarify in-state and out-of-state entities when emergency exemption requests are made public, and other primarily like housekeeping changes. During that rulemaking, we did let interested parties know that more substantive rule changes will be held for 2025, which is why we're here today. Next slide, please. So what went into creating the red lines that were posted in October? We gathered input from the public through ongoing public comment. We held 2 listening sessions in September 2025. And then Oregon Health Policy Board also held conversations and public comments that are maybe incorporated into the red line today. We also reviewed public comments that were suggested during the 2024 rulemaking process. Next slide, please. So for the feedback today, we have a summary posted and the link will be in the chat. Feedback and suggested rule changes along with notes how the input may have been addressed. I do want to note that there are some suggestions that are still pending review and to see if it can be incorporated, partially incorporated, or not incorporated. I do want to note that a substantial number of comments and suggestions that HICMO has received would require statutory changes and cannot be addressed through administrative rulemaking. There have also been suggestions that may be more appropriate for sub-regulatory guidance or that program guidance, as I mentioned earlier. So we will continue to update this document to reflect comments and suggestions that are submitted throughout the RAC process, including some that may have been submitted within this week, today, and then all the way through November 13th. And we have and will continue to make suggested changes to rules that align with the intention behind the comment while remaining within our statutory scope. Next slide, please. All right, so we will move into going over the draft rules. Next slide, please. All right, so today's goal, Sarah will go through each rule section and we'll pause for feedback from RAC members. If you are a RAC member, please raise your hand and we will call on you. We have 80 minutes allotted and we want to ensure that we have time to go through all of the sections. So if you're unable to provide your comment today or would like more time to compile your feedback, we will have this meeting recording posted online for you to review. And we request that written or verbal feedback is submitted by email, form, or voicemail by Thursday, November 13th. Any feedback received after this date may not be incorporated into the second draft. If you're a member of the Republic and want to give feedback, we have time allotted after this section to hear your comment. So with that, I will hand it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Cassie. And thanks for your patience, Tom. I see your hand. Do you want to go ahead and comment or question?
Just a real quick comment. I talked to somebody about, because the first thing that you said about the framework and guiding principles, which influenced strongly what this document should be, didn't say approved. Now I do understand it was approved. I talked to somebody, but I also understand that there was some redlining sent back by the DOJ that they're going to have to look at those again. Am I correct on that?
This is a reference to the guiding principles document that the policy board reviewed and approved. There were some red lines that OHA sent back after consultation with DOJ to the policy board. There's a red line version with those comments for everyone's reference, as well as a final clean version. Those were sent back to the board, and my understanding is that there was no discussion or additional conversation that happened at the policy board meeting this week.
Right.
So I
That's my
believe they
understanding.
stand, and I do not believe they're planning to take that up. I'd be happy to confirm that offline, but my understanding is they are
Okay.
accepting the red lines back.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And then just a broad question, not to be answered right now, because this is a big process. But now, in the meantime, we have a thing called the Corporate Practices of Medicine Act that underlie this, that seems to come into some of this document. And I won't get into that, but I think that's going to be an important thing to think about in this, that statute in terms of the rulemaking. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the comment. Question in the chat from Jeff about questions and comments going forward. Yes, so what we're about to do is walk through each section of the rules. I'm going to frame up whether or not there are any proposed changes for each section and what they are, and then we'll pause for any questions or comments about that section. Yes, if you can raise your hand, that'll help us facilitate and call on you in order. That would be great. And we'll bring you on and off mute as we go. I saw your thumbs up. Okay, Sierra.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. So I just wanted to check in based on our review of the materials and the process today. It looks like the full set of administrative rules is within scope for this RAC, and we're supportive of that approach and wanted to confirm that that is accurate.
Correct. The full scope of administrative rules is in scope for this rulemaking process. We do not have, as you will see, proposed changes in all sections of the rules, but that doesn't mean that you cannot comment on them and that we might not have proposed changes in a subsequent red line.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other process questions or comments? I want to make sure everyone has a really good understanding of how we're about to move forward before we get into the weeds. Yeah, Tom.
I find that I'm glad to see there's public comment at the end. I always sometimes it's say, oh, 2 minutes or 3 minutes. We should allow the amount of time. If there's not enough comment, if someone wants to talk longer, let them talk longer if there's time allotted to, according to how many people want to speak. Let's not limit people when there's maybe time available. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that. I think let's add one facilitation note. If there are folks who are not RAC members, but are members of the public and want to provide public comment, can you just send a quick note in the chat so we know and have a sense of how to allocate that time? That would be helpful. We'll check again as we go, but if anyone is here and knows you want to submit public comment later, maybe give us a heads up right now. Okay. You also can be unsure about public comments. Totally fine. We'll check in as we go. All right. Any other questions or comments about process or scope? Jeff Scroggin. I think that was a hand. Hang on a sec.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I know people are working really, really hard, and I think, like Tom said, that red line is the foundation for some of the conversation and changes, which makes sense. Glad the board had the space, time, and so on to go through it and get those. But kind of like Tom was alluding to, the process to get to them was kind of opaque for me. I had a hard time. That red line wasn't posted to the board meeting, and then it wasn't shared into like significantly into the board when there was no ability to review that red line when the board discussed it. There was no public comment in that meeting. And it's been difficult to track that particular red line in the process from just my perspective. I know people are working really hard on that and appreciate so much that the board was able to make the time for those extra conversations, but also wanted to flag it has been a little bit challenging to track this red line and make it through.
Thanks for that comment. I'm happy to pass that on to the board staff, and hopefully the RAC process and the proposed red lines in these upcoming conversations will be a little more transparent. Okay, let's go ahead and start getting into the rule content. So next slide, please. This is a summary of all of the sections of the HCMO Administrative Rule 409070, and then all of the subcomponents of that. What we have on the slide here is bolding to show where we have current proposed changes in the draft rules document. To Sierra's question, anything here, bolded or not bolded, is in scope for this rulemaking. Please do not feel like you have to limit your comments only to that. Only to the bolded sections. The bolded sections are where we have proposed changes today to start the conversation. Okay, I'm going to start going through. Maybe I'll do a pulse check in a few minutes about how the speed is. So first slide, scope and purpose. Next slide, Melissa, please. We do not have any proposed changes to this section of the rules. Are there any comments that RAC members would like to make about the scope and purpose today? Sierra, please.
Yeah, thank you. So not a comment really specific to this start of the rules, but really looking at the full scope of what is proposed today. First, the Hospital Association really appreciates the opportunity to provide feedback on these rules, and we will have specific feedback on the proposed changes, but we also think it's really important to keep in mind the much broader context for this program and Oregon's healthcare system. Our healthcare system is struggling, and this program is contributing to that. So you will hear from the Hospital Association some themes throughout this conversation. We are concerned that many of the proposed changes open the door to less certainty, more cost, and more time to complete a transaction. And each of these are a problem, but combined, they're even worse. So I wanted to preview that as some of the broader concerns that we have for this RAC. Thank you.
Thanks, Sierra. Can we go back to the scope and purpose slide, please? We skipped ahead accidentally. All right, Jessica.
Okay, sorry about that. I was getting used to the unmuting and remuting process here. Sarah, thank you so much. I just wanted to say that we are coming today prepared to respond to the proposed changes, but that the clarification around everything being in scope. We just want to reserve the right to provide those comments and not send a signal either way that our lack of comment today be a surprise that we may submit something in writing prior to the next meeting, and just want to flag that we're reserving that right and appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jessica. Understood. I'm sure many of your fellow RAC members and members of the public that are listening and might provide comment feel similarly. So yes, we are prepared. Tom.
Well, I did this morning. I've submitted a list of comments. This is the third time. Some of it's redundant. But I did notice, like that in the public comment, the sections were referenced a lot through the public comment section. Some of the comments I had made previously. I'm hoping not to get you all caught up on my redundancies. But I do find that the scope and purpose is consistent with the statute and guidelines, and it's good to know that. The consistencies then become in the rulemaking down further beyond the scope and purpose. I would also like to say and remind people that since this all started, Oregonians now have a constitutional right to health care, a fundamental right. This is the guiding over constitutional document that now states we need to do something to make sure that affordable health care is a part of that. And that's also part of this triple aim thing. And so I just think that we need to keep that in our reflection as we move forward, that anything that gets in the way of that constitutional right or this process should be more positive, enhance that right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, let's move to the second section. Nope, definitions slide, please. Okay, 0005 definitions. We do not have any proposed changes in the current red line draft for today's discussion. That said, I do want to acknowledge that there were a number of comments that have been received over the last 2 years related to health equity and the health equity definition. And so just as you are reserving the right to provide additional comment, maybe we are reserving the right to provide some additional red lines in the definition section before the second RAC meeting. Any comments or questions about definitions? Tom. And
there we go.
Also, sorry, I'm going to just jump in for a second. I really appreciate you all bearing with us on the muting and unmuting. We have had some recent Zoom bombing that we are trying to mitigate against. So appreciate your patience in this virtual space.
That's fine. Some of this stuff brought up before. I served on the previous RAC, as you know, and I did make a comment in my submission that, a couple places where the corporate practices of medicine statute might now have implications for this, particularly in number 7 and 8 as an example. And 13, the issue, I'm not sure it's ever been clarified for me, this because it goes back and forth, the domestic health insurer versus insurer, right? The one that I'm just an insurer, that's all we do, versus I'm domestic health insurer. We have other things that we do besides provide insurance. Is there an ability to get that cleared through these definitions? And because there's a lot of references to that going down and further into the document. And it really, it's rare now that an insurer is just an insurer. They have other functions. So I don't know. It just creates for me some confusion in terms of understanding the nature of the business that we're talking about, a domestic insurer versus an insurer.
Thanks, Tom. Jeff.
I'm getting faster. I just really appreciate you saying you might take a look at the equity definition. I think that's really important now. And I really, really appreciate that you're seriously looking at that. Thank you for being willing to take a look at putting some pen to paper around clarifying that more than ever. And appreciate the thought about maybe some sideboards and more definitions there.
Thanks for the comment. Tom again.
No. Yeah, just repeating that, which is, yes, I think the expectation is that the definition of from the Oregon Health Policy Board is the one that should be used. It's referenced in the framework, and it should be. I'm hoping that's the one that you will just insert as appropriate. The other definition again, essential services, and maybe I don't understand all of the services that are outlined for Medicaid and all that stuff, the priority list. But it seems to me that adding specifically a call out for behavioral health on those essential services would be very important in light of the discussion that's going on in the state. I wrote a comment about emergency care, infectious disease, and all that stuff, but maybe they're all buried in the priority services. Let's see, anything else that I want to highlight today? Just the health equity one. Looking through some notes here, it'll go quick. I'll lower my hand for now, and I'll come back to you if you give me a pause.
All right. Thanks for your comment, Tom. Let's go ahead to the next section. I'm going to keep us moving, especially because I know many of you will submit additional comments in writing. So trying to keep us balanced today. So the next section, 0010, covered transactions. OHA does not have any proposed changes to the draft red line at this time. Any comments about this section? Jeff.
Slower that time. No, but I don't know how you're going to squeeze it all into 2 racks, and I'll just tell you that right now. It seems like a lot of material to cover. The program is incredibly important, and the entire rule set is open for conversation. And I just think there is a lot here. It seems like you have put everything in scope for us, so I think there is a lot to think about. And I agree with Tom about the OHPB definition. I'm going to put two voices about it on the record because it's worth the time to do it about the definition of health equity, I think so. Also, I have this later as a point, but it's helpful to get it out now. I won't say it later. Don't worry, Sarah. But he's right. Prioritize list, cost growth target. There's a lot of almost dated stuff built into the rules and law around what governs and the decisions of the program. And I don't know. I defer to you about what the plan is to update those as there are changes to those programs. And those are 2 very clear ones that Tom mentioned, but there are other examples that you know about. I will lower my hand for at least a moment.
Thanks for your comment. Tom again.
Under, let's see. Oh yeah. Are we on covered transactions? Yes, we are.
On covered transactions.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. The word will is used and significantly is used. These are very vague terms, and you can't proactively know the wills and the significantly. So I put in my comments that the wills be changed to may and eliminate the word significantly, because if you're reducing, this is very judgmental. When you reduce services significantly, does that mean, as an example, that somebody would have to go, instead of driving 50 miles to the ER, they now have to drive 100 miles to the ER? Is that a reduction, a significant reduction, or just a reduction? So I think that judgmental word of significant, or the anticipatory word of will, which you cannot know ahead, if it may, then it has to be considered if it's a possibility. So that is what I put under, it's number C and D, 1C and D.
Thanks, Tom. I want
okay,
to.
Yeah, that's it.
I want to provide a quick.
And number 3 is also okay. Thanks.
Thanks. I want to just provide a quick note. Cassie previewed this in the intro, that some comments that we receive through this process may be more appropriate for sub-regulatory guidance or statute. And I want to note that the significant is a place where OHA does have sub-regulatory guidance, and it's fairly detailed. And so comments that we receive related to that or clarifying or tightening that up might be more appropriate for sub-regulatory space. So please feel free to keep sharing. I'm just calling that out as an example of a place where it may not be in rule, it may be in sub-regulatory. Okay, let's move to the next section. going to be a taskmaster today. So section 0015, this is the materiality standard. We are proposing clarifying language regarding in and out-of-state entities, including clarifying parameters for when an entity may be considered out of state. There has been some confusion to date, and so we would like to avoid confusion between 2A and 2B, and to clarify that there are multiple ways that entities can be engaged in doing business, and we would like our in and out of state definitions to not be ambiguous about that. Sierra.
Thank you. First, I think that the red line needs a little bit more work. I'm not sure it provided the clarity that you were looking for. And then also, the Hospital Association has previously raised concerns with this rule, and those concerns remain really around the fact that the out-of-state criteria in rule has no basis in statute. The statute simply uses the phrase out-of-state entity, which has a common meaning, and we should expect that that is what legislators anticipated when they reviewed the statute. And so the rule that OHA proposed creates an arbitrary standard, the piece around no more than 100 Oregon residents in each of the last 3 years. And again, that has no basis in statute, and it does create practical challenges.
Thanks for your comment, Sierra. Tom, is that a new hand or a lingering hand? Okay, hands went down. Are there any other comments on the materiality standard section of the rules? Tom, new hand.
This is where that word, just to point out, that word insurer shows up. And do we mean just an insurer? Does it mean an domestic insurer, and how they differentiate? So it's on line. I don't have the line exactly mentioned, but it's in there somewhere, and the material is standard. Okay, thanks.
Thanks for that. Okay, let's move to the next section, 0020, excluded transactions. We do not have any changes in the proposed red line at this time. Are there any comments about this section of the rules? Tom again.
I submitted this before. I think you need, is there some place where the word comprehensive is defined? It's in 1DC, the word comprehensive. And then I have a comment about, I'm not sure how this works. Really needs to be decided whether there should be a filing fee. And maybe this is later in the rules, you'll decide all of this later, but that since there's some comment about fees, I made a comment about it here. Thanks.
Thanks for the comment. We are getting to fees, so stay with us on that. Okay, let's move to the next section, 0022, emergency and exempt transactions. We do have a proposed change in the red lines. OHA currently provides the applicant who is requesting the emergency exemption 10 calendar days advance notice before posting the request for emergency exemption for public comment. We are proposing shortening that from 10 calendar days to 3 business days. And specifically, this is not the public comment period is being shortened. This is the how much advance notice does the entity have before the call for public comment goes live. Comments about this proposed change, Sierra, please.
Yeah, actually, I was hoping you could just speak more to this. Can you elaborate on why OHA is proposing this change, and from OHA's perspective, what problem does this solve?
Yes, I think one of the pieces of feedback that we've received, and in talking to many of the entities going through transactions, or that may be whether or not there's a question about this is an emergency, is that there's a sense of urgency. And so having 10 days before we even open a call for public comment feels like it introduces unnecessary delay in moving forward the process of reviewing that emergency exemption request. We understand that the entities want advance notice, and I believe this was something that came up in the original legislative discussion around this, where entities maybe have requested an emergency exemption for a transaction, but have not yet been able to communicate to their own employees that there's a transaction. And so the advance notice period was a time to sort of get organized. That's my understanding of the original intent here, but we have heard that the sense of urgency, this is an unnecessary delay. Sierra and Sabrina, I see you have the same question. Did that help? Other comments about this section of the rules? Tom.
I have submitted numerous comments in this because I think really the emphasis on protecting the public and the consumers is sometimes a little bit lost in this. So in particular, I will just point out that the line should be, let's see, in 1B, it's the transaction is urgently needed to protect the interest of consumers. And that needs to be up front and center. And when you put it equally to the entity, protect the entity, I think that's where historically some things have gotten a little bit lost and the entity has received favoritism. I am glad to see the shortening of the notice period. I will save the other comments that I might have in the interest of time to see if we have time as this goes on. I'll come back to it. Yeah, so
Thanks, Tom.
basically consumer protection up front.
Thank you for your comment. Jeff.
Can you hear me? Oh, that got easier that time. You guys let me unmute my, thank you. Appreciate it. I don't have any particular issue with this. I think that the reason I raised my hand is to plant a flag for a larger conversation about the emergency exemption process. And if this is the only change, is this the only change that we should be considering for the emergency exemption process? I'm nervous that, and I saw this in public comment a little bit, I thought that the emergency exemption process has become the de facto process because no one can get through the comprehensive process. So word is out, you've got to go through the emergency process. And so I don't know that this is the only change we want to affect to the emergency or exempt transactions. If, none of if the comprehensive review part has kind of created this perverse incentive again, like I thought I saw this in a public comment even. So just wanted to kind of plant that conversation and give a warning we might have some more to say about that.
Thanks for your comment, Jeff. I think if there are other proposed changes to this section, certainly we welcome those in writing or via the email or voicemail form. Jessica.
There you go. Okay. I just wanted to say that we appreciate the agency looking for an opportunity to find ways to speed up this process. And so this represents a step forward in that. We think there are opportunities across these rules to look for other ways to move this process along. And so I just wanted to thank you for looking for that, and taking this step forward. We think that's great. We think this needs to be replicated throughout, and we'll be providing comments to that extent, but wanted to acknowledge the great work here.
Thank you for your comment and looking forward to other specific proposals. Tom.
Kind of reflecting on this, it's really true that, and I'll be very specific, that as this big work has come upon this HCMO, way different from what was initially talked about when this was made. And now we have this giant behemoth of United Healthcare jumping into Oregon in such a way that it puts a lot of people on guard about mergers and trends and, mergers. And maybe rightly so, but also I'd like to I think it's reasonable to say that some mergers may really be in the public interest and not for the profit sharing world out there that's trying to gouge us here in Oregon. So so I think that if the comprehensive review is too onerous, it needs to be very good. But if it's too onerous, jumping to that emergency exemption, which we found in the Corvallis Clinic situation as the highlight, has been, it just can't be the default. And if it's looked at as, oh, we're not going to go through this because it's too much. I guess, and again, I don't have the answer to that, but something to weigh in. But the emergency exemption should really be true emergencies and not an easy default. But while at the same time, the comprehensive section should move along, review section. Hopefully you have enough staff and money to do those comprehensive reviews in a timely manner. So I do have one other comment. It has to do with the thing which has to do with, I don't think there's any place that in an emergency situation that confidentiality can outweigh the public interest. And there is an indication in there that confidentiality can outweigh the public interest. And that's not the role of OHA. And maybe that's statutory. That's going to have to be dealt with somewhere else. And if that's the case, I do understand. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment, Tom. Charlie.
Well, I guess maybe this isn't for this section, but related to emergency transactions and kind of going off what Tom was saying. I appreciated seeing later in the red line the more robust review of trade secret claims by entities. And it seemed especially in this case that is something that really needs to happen. So I think we might make some suggestion if it makes sense to include something in this section related to that. But I think from kind of the public accountability perspective, it really is important that outside groups and the public are able to evaluate the claims being made by entities claiming an exemption. And if too much of that information is shielded through trade secret claims, it makes that really difficult.
Thanks for your comment, Charlie. We will talk about confidentiality in that section in a little bit later as well. I do want to provide just one note of clarification, I guess for the record. Since HCMO began, HCMO has approved one emergency exemption. So just for the record, there's only been one. Okay, any other comments on 0022? Let's go ahead to the next section then. Next slide. 0025, acquisition of control, presumptions and disclaimers. We do not have any proposed changes in the red line at this time. Any comments? Tom, please.
There's a line, it's a number 2 that says must fully disclose. Is that to everybody? Does that mean to the public? Yes, that's my question. Is that the definition of fully disclosed? Does that mean the public?
Thanks, Tom. We're not answering questions live, so I will.
Okay.
If that's a comment, noted.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. It is. All right. Thank you.
Okay, let's move to the next section. So the next section, 0030, requirements to file a notice of material change transaction. So I wanted to preview today. We're not talking actual fee schedule today, but I did want to preview for everybody that we are going to be proposing an update to the fee schedule for the Market Oversight Program. So it is a known issue. There was a Lund Report article on this last summer that the program fee schedule is not sufficient to cover the costs of the program. That is a statutory directive that the program is intended to be fee supported. And so through this rulemaking, we are going to be proposing updates to the fee schedule, and we are planning to release that proposed change as part of the second draft redline rules. And we'll have considerable time for discussion on this in the second RAC meeting. I'm happy to share a little bit more about that, but I see a number of comments. So let's go Sierra, Sabrina, and then Jessica.
Thank you. First, how is OHA planning to establish the fee amounts?
I'm not answering that question live today. I think we're going to be sharing more information about that for the second RAC. Sabrina?
Hi, so Sabrina Riggs, I'm here with the Oregon Independent Medical Coalition. So my membership are clinics that are independent and wish to remain independent. A few of them have gone through the HCMO process already, or are currently going through the process, or are potentially even looking to go through the process at some point. And I think I would just flag here, these are smaller clinics. They have less resources than some large systems, and already these clinics are sharing that they find the fee structure today to be burdensome and costly, especially as they are attempting to collaborate and maintain their independence. This is already challenging times for healthcare, as you've heard. I think there are more challenging times ahead. And so we're very concerned with increased fees and the addition of new fees because it looks like there is now going to be a fee applied to each follow-up review as well. So we'll kind of stay tuned for what the structure is going to look like and what the new proposal is, but I'm flagging that concern early.
Thank you. Jessica, then Charlie.
Thanks, Sarah. I just in looking at this language, we have a few concerns. One, it's hard to put this in context because we don't know what the proposed fee schedule is. So we're providing some kind of general comments here, and I'm sure we'll have feelings about the actual fees. But I think what we're really concerned about is we look at sub four. And it looks like even the new fees may be kind of tied into this notion of if you don't pay your fees, then we may revoke an existing exemption. And then what does that mean? If a transaction that's been approved and then there's a dispute over, again, not knowing whether the fee will be a flat fee or whether it'll be a percentage or whatever it is that's going to be proposed, if there is a disagreement, do we risk having a transaction then disapproved? And then what does that mean for all of the services that have been provided in the meantime? I think that is just too many things. We would ask that we remove that. At least the first sentence in second sentence in 4. If you got fees, you got lots of different ways to require us and compel us to pay those fees, including ordinary collection practices that are within the agency's control. Threatening a transaction over a dispute over a fee and the uncertainty that creates just feels a bit too much to us and unnecessary. So we would ask for that. Well, again, follow up in writing with that, but would make the case that would be necessary. In addition, we would love to see as part of a discussion of fees, we get that the program isn't covering its costs, and we're interested in alongside any request for fee increases, that we have a conversation about what actions the agency has explored to try and reduce the costs associated with this program so that any increases in fees are met alongside efforts to try and get the costs under control, because it is a barrier to seeking this as a remedy. And just at a time where, frankly, a lot of health systems, including the one I represent, are really struggling. And so we kind of want to see what have we done to try and reduce costs at the same time we're seeking fee increases. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment, Jessica. Charlie.
Well, my initial comments when I saw this was that we're very supportive of changing the fees, conditioned on the fact that they will be changed to make sure that the program has the resources it needs to do its job. And so glad to hear that that's something that we'll be discussed in more detail ahead of the next meeting, but just want to express our support for changes to the fee structure that are required to make sure that the goals of this program are met and the resources are available to make sure that the process is rigorous and done to the quality that is needed.
Thanks, Charlie. James?
Hi, thanks for the James Power of the State Health. Thanks for the time. Hey, regarding fees, I think in order to consider this question, it would be very important for us to have transparency on what is the magnitude of fees that are collected, including the costs associated with the legal and/or other consultants that OHA is hiring for each of these transactions. It's very hard to opine on fee increases without seeing that total cost structure. Is that something that's possible for RAC 2 or more in general, something that could be disclosed publicly? Thanks.
Thanks for your comment, James. And I will say, maybe in reflection of some of your comments, I think understand that there's some frustration that we're talking about a rule change without the specifics yet. Today, just wanted to preview that we will be talking about this, and all of your comments are really helping us understand what information will be helpful to bring to RAC 2 to support that discussion. Sierra, then Tim.
Thank you. I really want to echo comments from Sabrina, Jessica, and James, but really building on that, OHA has been shifting exorbitant costs from comprehensive reviews to the parties of a transaction. And the impact of that is that it is then shifting costs, which then drives up the cost of healthcare in Oregon. And as you are thinking about materials that would be helpful for the discussion in the second meeting, I would really like to say that it would be helpful if OHA can provide an accounting of its costs by transaction that the RAC members can review. Because again, as has already been stated, transparency by OHA will be really important for assessing proposals around the fees. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Tim.
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, I'll just kind of join the bandwagon here about just concerns over the overall costs. In particular, the way in which, at least as I understand, OHA has been trying to deal with some of the cost overruns or shortfalls is to rely more heavily on those outside consultants, and whether the intent here is to increase the fees and thereby potentially reduce the reliance on those outside consultants during the comprehensive review process, or if the proposal is really to maintain the same structure of that outside reliance, but just increase the fees. I think we'd be able to better comment on these proposed increases if we understand how it's going to impact the overall distribution of costs as between the outside consultants. Because as you guys probably know, the outside consultants' fees can oftentimes be many multiples of the actual fee that is being paid. So a better understanding of that will help us understand the overall structure. The other thing I wanted just to mention is that there appears to be a new fee that's going to be charged for follow-up review associated with the 1, 2, and 5 year. And I was just hoping to get a better sense maybe at the next track meeting. I understand you're not answering questions now, but the statutory authority for that kind of additional fee in addition to the filing fee. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Mark, please.
Yes, thank you. Mark Bonanno, Oregon Medical Association. We work with physicians and physician associates statewide. Just a couple of comments on fees, and I know we don't have the information yet, and we'll have a second rack on it, and we'll provide some written comment. I think it's really important for OHA to remember the context too of the time we're in terms of the cost to all healthcare entities out there. Many of our clinics that we work with are still struggling post-pandemic. And so the way the statute and the rule are structured, it doesn't look at net income, it looks at net patient revenue. And I think it's important to understand the context and probably, connect with some clinics in terms of how they are doing financially and how does this impact them in that process. The other thing, transparency would be super helpful. Anytime there's a change to a rule, providing the context like we just did with that change from a 10-day to a 3-day, that's really helpful information. And then cost efficiency. I'm not seeing anything yet that explains how OHA on its side will help contain the costs associated with review of these transactions. So again, just context, transparency, and efficiency. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Jeff.
I have a few things to say here for the record. I think that this is the opportunity to kind of talk about the program because we're providing advice on the fees, which is the underlying structure for how a lot of it works. So I read this article. I went to this slide and read the article to learn more about some of the case the agency is making here. I need to put some things on the record. First, as you all know, most of you know, OHSU supported the legislation that created HCMO. They were the only hospital in Oregon that supported the legislation that created HCMO. And OHSU continues to support the goals like increasing access to care, reducing cost growth, increasing access to services in underserved areas, rectifying historical and contemporary factors that lead to health inequities. All of those goals that are in the statute, we continue to be strong supporters of them. But some of the public comment and even some of the comment that's lifted up in this article is doesn't seem to be making its way into the conversation today. For example, this article quotes Dr. Santa, a former board member, and a person who's weighed in a lot on these matters. And Dr. Santa's most recent public comment is pretty critical of the agency and the program. And we're not having any kind of conversation anywhere about that. It doesn't take place at the OHPB. There's not OHA leadership. There's no transparency into the program that we can see. There's not a place to have the conversation because that public comment doesn't seem to be being reflected either, even though it's, he's quoted in this article. So I would ask for more of to have a conversation about some of those issues if it's going to be fee funded. It's a public program. The public should have transparency into how y'all are making decisions, what you're reviewing, what the timeline is, so that they can have that information and make their decisions about healthcare. And there seems to be almost like a one-way transparency. Entities provide a lot of transparency, but that transparency seems to be lacking as an oversight mechanism at the agency for this program. We're not seeing, well, what analysis did they do? These fees fund a lot of analysis that's not going to healthcare. It's not going, to wages or direct healthcare. It's going to this analysis that no one sees and that there's no oversight on. People say, let the process play out, I've heard. And the process is all of the comprehensive reviews have gone past the 180 days that was identified in statute as the timeline. And so I know that this is like I'm trying not to have it as a question and kind of just put it on the record, but there are, as a comment, I think, where do we have the conversation about some of these concerns now that the program is years old and has done many reviews, and we can more substantively talk about maybe the boutique nature of the analysis and if there should be some sideboards or goalposts that might help it easier for staff to meet some of the statutory guidelines that are already laid out, like the 180-day timeline. And I'll put my hand down.
Thanks for your comment, Jeff. I know that we need to have more conversation about this. We are dedicating significant time. And again, just thank you for all your immediate comments and reactions today. That's going to really help us set up the discussion and provide information that will be helpful for you for the second RAC meeting. So thank you for your patience with letting us stagger this conversation. We also didn't want it to be a surprise that we were proposing a fee increase, so wanted to preview that today. So appreciate that understanding. Again, thank you for all your comments. This is really going to help us set up the discussion and provide information that you're asking for the second RAC. I'm going to keep us moving and want to go through a couple more sections, and then we're going to take a 5-minute break as we go. So let's move to the next slide. The next slide is section 0035, material change transaction involving a domestic health insurer. OHA does not have any proposed changes in the red line at this time. Are there any comments about this section? Tom, please.
So this is where it stands right out front, right? A domestic health insurer. And at some point, it would be helpful to me to if we had an example of who's a domestic health insurer in this state and who's an insurer in this state. I'm assuming that a coordinated care organization, as an example, is a domestic health insurer. Or now United Healthcare may be a domestic health insurer because they both provide this worldwide insurance and also run clinics. But who would be an example of and maybe you're not even answering this question, but somewhere I want to find the answer is, what's an example of somebody that's just an insurer in the state? Is it Blue Cross? They don't, or you have all these insurance and hospital association affiliations. So yeah. Domestic foreign alien insurer. Domestic insurer means an insurer formed. Okay, there's definitions, but I'll try to sort through that. But it's still confusing for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. And thanks, Rick, in the chat. Appreciate the citation. Any other comments on this section? All right, let's move to the next slide. The next section, 0040, material change transactions involving a charitable organization or hospital. Again, no proposed changes in the red line at this time. Are there any comments about this section? Okay, I'm not seeing any comments. It's 11 o'clock. Let's take a 5-minute break and come back at 11:05 to keep going. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back in a few minutes. Let me start the recording. All right, welcome back to this first RAC meeting. We are in the process of walking through the proposed changes in the red line rule draft. We're going section by section. Let's keep going. We're going to go to the next slide, which is section 0042, optional application for determination of covered transaction status. So I'm going to provide a little context here and give some examples about this, this proposed change. So in the HCMO program, entities have the option of requesting a determination from HCMO. We have a proposed transaction. Is it reviewable or is it subject to review? This is something that we currently offer. It's sort of like a technical assistance program or technical assistance component of the program. This is there is no fee associated with the determination, and it is not required. This is something that sometimes there are transactions where the entities might feel like they're borderline or they're not sure how the regulations or the sub-regulatory guidance might apply. So we offer this as an option. So we are proposing a couple of changes to align the rule language with current practice. So this is the current practice around publishing the determination letters. So what we're proposing changing in the red line is if the entity consents or if the transaction is publicly known, and publicly known would include HCMO has accepted a notice and has begun a review, issued a call for public comment. HCMO will post the determination letter within 1 business day. If the entity does not consent or if the transaction is not publicly known, HCMO will post the determination no less than 6 months after the transaction closes, if it closes. So let me give a couple of examples of this. So HCMO transaction number 25, this was involving Rite Aid. There was a determination request for the Rite Aid transaction. This was not subject to review. HCMO did not require Rite Aid to file a notice. It was not, there was no preliminary review of that transaction. HCMO asked the entities to consent to post the determination letter, and they agreed, and it is on the HCMO website. So you can find the link to that determination. It's a pretty high level. Entities asked, HCMO said not subject to review. Here's another example of this in current practice. Transaction 38, that was the Legacy Pacific Source transaction. The entities involved in that transaction requested the optional determination from OHA prior to filing the notice of transaction and beginning the preliminary review. OHA posted the determination on the transaction page along with the other materials because that was a determination that said, yes, this transaction is subject to review, and then there was a review. So the determination was made public as part of that process. So hopefully that gives a little context and some examples. This is the current practice. We just want the rule to be explicit about how that works. So comments about this section. Tom, is this a new hand or an old hand? And then Tim. Hold on, Tom. We will get you off of mute in a second. You are still muted.
There we go. Am I there? Yes. Okay. So just I want to briefly go. I missed out on 40. I want to say since it's a charitable organization in 40, it should say the DOJ must. DOJ.
I'm going to stop you because we're going to keep moving. If you have questions on 40, can you submit them in writing? We're going to stay on 42 right now.
Okay, thanks. All right, bye.
Okay, Tim.
Thanks, Sarah. So a couple comments on this. So in the first instance, not all transactions are publicly known or intended to be publicly known. So there are certain instances where parties will want a determination, get a negative determination. And from our perspective, it doesn't make sense to then make that public if the transaction is not otherwise public through other fora. So we'd appreciate some sort of opportunity for if a transaction is confidential otherwise, that they could still request confidentiality and it not be posted at all, because that would otherwise be a pretty significant deterrent for confidential transactions to go to OHA and be transparent and find out whether they are subject. The other potential issue here is that I think that it's pretty unobjectionable just based on the way that OHA is currently drafting the determination letters where they don't contain much factual information about the rationale for the determination. I think this could potentially be problematic if OHA does increase the amount of transparency it has regarding these to discuss the rationale for the determination one way or another, because those rationales can themselves turn on confidential information. So at very least, giving the folks an opportunity to review the proposed published order and make confidentiality requests prior to it being made public. That would be a nice concession for the potential for there to be confidential information in these orders.
Thanks for the comment, Tim. It sounds like you potentially have some suggested language changes there, and I really welcome that in writing if that's what I heard.
Thanks, Will do.
Sabrina.
Hey, thank you. Sorry about that. I think that Tim's comments make a lot of sense. And then the other thing that I would like to request is a narrower definition of publicly known. I think if the intent is it's publicly known if it's been filed with HCMO, that makes sense, but that it should be narrow.
Okay, thanks for that comment, Sabrina. Mark.
Yes, thank you. Again, Mark Bonanno, Oregon Medical Association. Anytime you've got a complex program like the HCMO program, it's really helpful to have access to, the experts that are managing the program. And we appreciate OHA leaning in on this because this process is not part of the statute itself. It's something OHA has stood up. I guess my only comment right now is it seems to be a balancing act between encouraging compliance, because that's what this does. It allows folks to go in and talk with OHA experts about the program, and potentially chilling that, access to the OHA experts. So I just make that comment, and we'll provide a little more in writing on that too.
Tim, okay, that was an old hand. Okay, I see it is down now. I do want to provide maybe one piece of context in response to Sabrina's question or comment about narrowing, and maybe in reflection. OHA's sort of working definition of publicly known means at present that the transaction notice has been filed and we've accepted that complete notice and it's sort of a live transaction review, and that the entities have issued a press release or are otherwise talking about it like in an investor meeting, or basically the information is available online. I think we've seen a number of times where there's been a press release about the transaction that came from the entities themselves. And that's if that helps describe publicly known a little better. Okay, other comments on this section? All right, let's keep going. Next section, 0045, form and contents of notice of material change transaction. We are proposing a change in the red lines to align with current practice. So the entities must provide complete and final definitive agreements no later than 15 days after the preliminary review period begins. If the entities cannot provide these agreements, the preliminary review period will be tolled. And I want to provide maybe one example of why this change and why this is current practice. We certainly want to encourage entities to file as soon as possible, engage with HCMO as soon as possible. We know the timelines can often be tight, and the complete and final agreements are not always available. And so we said, yep, okay to file, okay to start the process, no problem. However, we have run into some examples where the complete and final definitive agreement differs, and in some cases differs substantially from the initially submitted term sheet, which essentially results in having to do the review twice or to redo review that had already been done. And so what we're looking to do is make sure that we're, again, being efficient in response to your comments, and that we're really only doing that work once based on the complete and final, or as complete and final as possible. So I think, again, maybe to Mark's comment about the balancing act of wanting to encourage entities to be able to engage in this process with OHA as soon as possible, not wanting to say you can't file until you have it, but acknowledging that sometimes that there are changes between maybe an initial term sheet or an initial agreement and then the final agreement. Hopefully that helps provide a little explanation here. And then Jessica.
Yeah, thanks. This is one of those things that we talked about clear back when the original bill was being negotiated and how challenging it is to get to a definitive agreement. And so the notion that we would need to, I mean, for all intents and purposes, if you have to have it within 15 days of filing for a preliminary review, you have to get to a definitive agreement before you file. I mean, that is a sea change in what we're requiring here versus going through the process. And I appreciate that there are some that I guess are willing to take the risk of having to go through the process again. We would be, frankly, more open to saying that if you're going to do that, you're going to have to pay more fees or whatever it is. But I am just the idea that we would then subject everyone to you have to get all the way to the end, not knowing whether you're going to get through an initial 30-day review or be subject to comprehensive review. All of the contingencies that you'd have to put into a definitive agreement, not knowing if there would be contingencies from the agency or not. All of that feels like just much too much. And this is contrary, again, to what we discussed and the whole intention that you wouldn't have to get to definitive agreement in order to start the HCMO process so that this process could be ongoing while you're still figuring out, does the deal work for everyone? So you haven't spent all of the time and capital to get to that point, only to have something go sideways in the review. We just are so strongly opposed to this. And we would also say that this is contrary to what is required in other states for review and even under federal review. So this would be unique to Oregon in a way that we don't think is appropriate. And we would really ask the agency to rescind these proposed changes.
Thanks for your comment, Jessica. Tim. Oh, Tim, you're on mute. Hang on.
Am I unmuted? Okay, great. Thanks. So, as you guys know, I represent a lot of clients in multi-state transactions where Oregon is just one part of the many state approvals they need to go through. And oftentimes the deal is not structured with Oregon in mind. 180 days, having definitive agreements 180 days before intentional closing almost never happens. It might happen in a large hospital transaction or a large insurance transaction where you have other parallel reviews going on, but it does not happen in standard transactions involving health clinics or other entities involved in the healthcare space. So this requirement, I think, could be quite counterproductive for OHA in the sense that if folks practically cannot file until they have definitive agreements, that is going to be putting more pressure on OHA from the parties to dispose of these reviews more quickly. It also makes effectively filing 180 days before anticipated closing a practical impossibility. I mean, I think that OHA is just going to find a lot more people filing much closer to when they need the transaction to close for business or other understandable reasons. And I know OHA has been quite accommodating in those instances, something we're really appreciative of. But we also, as people who are in front of you all the time, want to put our clients in a position where they're not having to ask for these kind of emergency reviews or for OHA to move more quickly. And to say that the parties effectively can't file until they have definitive agreements, I think works in the opposite direction. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Okay, Tom, please.
Thank you so much. So this is also a question about whether there maybe should be a fee with a pre-consent filing, since it does incur some cost, but also reflects the issue that some of these things are going to involve charitable organizations. So the it says as applicable, maybe there should be clarification of what that means. And in particular, maybe be more clear that the Department of Justice must be involved in certain cases, because this might streamline it. If you get into the pre-conference filing and you say, well, there's a question with the DOJ, maybe just to have the DOJ there at the beginning, we might streamline the process. So thank you.
Sierra.
Thank you. We echo Jessica's concerns and really just want to fully emphasize that this proposal does not align with the reality of how transactions work. And it, again, is very rare for parties to reach a fully executed definitive agreement 180 days prior to the closing date. We cannot emphasize that enough. And so our request is that OHA strike all these proposed changes to 0045.
Thanks. Charlie.
Hello. Well, I guess this is more of a question, maybe not to you, but to others on the RAC. I just as somewhat of a layperson, the idea of a agency reviewing a proposed transaction that isn't even finalized yet seems like just intuitively it doesn't make sense. So it would be interesting just to hear like what are the things that are not finalized in these circumstances that, maybe aren't things that really need to be reviewed. So I don't know if anyone has any detail to share. I think that would be helpful to better understand the problem that's being raised.
All right. I'm going to not give people time to respond to Charlie directly, but I think have heard a number of comments and see the comments in the chat as well regarding concerns around this proposed change. Noted. Let's move on to the next section. Next section, 0050, retention of outside advisors. We are proposing several changes to this section. So the first is to change the word to must. So requiring that OHA and DOJ must require that outside advisors are not subject to any conflicts of interest and will protect confidential information. This is our practice. This is what's been happening the whole time, but it was not explicitly clear in rule, and so are tightening that up to make it clear. The second bullet is adding related costs for document management software to the list of reimbursable costs. As we've gone forward through transactions, there have been several transactions that have had incredibly large amounts of information that require storage, management, and additional support, and we're looking at adding that to the outside advisor costs in the event that there are large transactions likely in comprehensive review with significant volume of materials. And then final change here, adding a clarification that failure to pay within 30 days of receiving an invoice may result in additional actions under Oregon statute for delinquent accounts. I think to earlier comments made today, this is not a change. There are options for collections in Oregon law. We are making a reference in rule to those existing authorities. So I see a lot of hands. Let's do Sierra, Jeff, and then Tim.
Thank you. So my comments are really to the changes that are summarized by the second and third bullet here. So OHA's authorizing statute allows costs for the programs to be recouped with filing fees, but not passed through to the parties on a case-by-case basis. And we are concerned about the related costs for document management software added to the list of reimbursable costs. And then also more broadly, related to the third bullet, parties are routinely receiving invoices from OHA 4 months or longer after the completion of their review. And we find it's unreasonable to expect that the parties pay such substantial and extraordinary costs within 30 days if OHA cannot provide the parties their invoices in a timely manner. So with all of this in mind, our request would be that OHA remove all of the proposed changes to this administrative rule.
Thanks for your comment. Jeff.
Thank you. I'll lower my hand. I've already talked a lot about some of the concerns we have around HCMO. This feels like an appropriate time to do them. We're talking about retention of outside advisors. Again, to my knowledge, in the years since HCMO's formation, no comprehensive review has ever been done in the 180-day timeline established by statute. We're paying advisors millions of dollars to do analysis that there is no summarization of or information of. We're not seeing any of the impacts listed in statute, like better access or lower healthcare costs that are the program's goals impacted by that comprehensive review. No one's gotten through. They're all timed out. And I don't know that getting more complexity, more bureaucracy at more cost to the entities with no oversight, no accountability, no transparency for meeting that timeline is easy to take. There's nothing compelling y'all to meet the timeline, only to kind of stretch it out further and further. So I do think you need the resources to do the job, and having the right advisors is crucial, but have some serious questions about how the state, is able to have appropriate oversight and accountability over the millions of dollars that's being spent on these advisors to ensure we're getting the impacts rather than having all of the comprehensive reviews just time out. That completes my comment.
Thank you for your comment, Jeff. Tim.
Thanks, Sarah. So a couple of comments on this. I think I echo other folks' frustration with the outside advisors and the fees. The fees that the outside advisors are able to charge through are at the top of market for legal representation. Certainly, very few attorneys in Oregon charge the fees that are being charged by these outside advisors. And the little transparency that we do have about what these advisors are doing, it really sounds like they're providing really core functions for the program. Not just providing targeted legal advice, but doing a lot of the basic document review, confidentiality checks, those kind of things. And if these are core costs of the program, there should be transparency into those, and they should be incorporated into the fee each filer. Not passed on a case-by-case basis. I think that's a key part of transparency for the program, is understanding how much it actually is costing to conduct these comprehensive reviews. And if OHA is relying on outside advisors to perform key functions, that is kind of hidden from the public. And as Jeff and others have noted, the costs are quite high. I mean, several hundreds of thousands of dollars per comprehensive review. And the bills that we get, because these are typically and overwhelmingly for legal advisors, for obvious reasons, we can't get any information about what the fee is going toward, or very little information about what the fee is going toward, for attorney-client privilege reasons, which is understandable, but it is tough to swallow that OHA needs 300,000 plus of pure legal advice for a comprehensive review such as this from out-of-state attorneys who don't necessarily have any specific expertise in Oregon law. The other thing I'll note is regarding the statutory authority for OHA to pass along document management software fees. It's our understanding that the statute says that OHA can pass along fees for professional advisors, but the overhead costs of the fee of the program need to be recouped via the fees, not individually on a case-by-case basis. So I do question the statutory authority for adding these document management fees to this advisors section. That's my comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment, Tim. Okay, Sabrina, then Jessica.
Perfect. Thanks. I think first, we appreciate the first bullet here on this slide. I think that change makes sense, and I'm appreciative of that. And then second, I would just really like to echo the comments that have been made by others about concern on excessive costs for advisor spending. I think ideally there would be some kind of appeals process, or even potentially a cap on what the outside advisors are going to cost. So that way entities, especially smaller entities, will have a better understanding of what to expect in terms of that cost. We also have concerns about the statutory authority to pass along the cost for document management software, and oppose that as well.
Understood. Thank you for your comment. Jessica.
Yeah, thank you. And wanted to just a couple of things. One, we would really be interested in an analysis from the authority on What, if anything, you all have done to look at if you have document software management needs, what, have you looked at acquiring such software on your own so that that's a programmatic cost instead of a per transaction cost that we pay over and over and over again? Are there savings there? Has the agency done that analysis? Have you examined whether it's possible to consider capping fees at a market rate that's similar to what costs are in Oregon, so that we're not, frankly, this statute is public. Entities know that you are going to retain people to do review. That kind of puts them in a place where they can mark up their fees, and they know it. And that, with all due respect to those outside advisors, that's an expense that just raises the cost of care in Oregon to consumers, because part of what makes these transactions so expensive. We don't think that that's the goal of the authority or anyone involved with this, but I think it is a potential outcome. And I think looking at, is there a way to cap fees, cap total cost, as Sabrina noted, and or look at a regulation that would say the fees charged can't exceed a market rate in Oregon, I think would be better. It'd be good to know if there's an analysis that could be done about what would the cost of outside advisors versus bringing in some additional in-house resource. Is there an offset there that allows some of the lower level work to occur without having to pay exorbitant fees? And then the last comment that we would have is, in order to find folks who don't have a conflict, we're going pretty far afield to find expertise to review transactions from folks who don't necessarily have a knowledge base about Oregon and Oregon's healthcare market. And there's a big difference between how the markets and consolidation on the East Coast or in the Midwest occurs or in the South than it happens here in the Northwest. And I think understanding and building local expertise on these reviews, there is benefit to that. We support not having conflicts. We think that's important. But we also think understanding our local market is also critical as we review these transactions. So those are just some things that we think are important to consider as we continue to deal with this section. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate the comment. Sierra, in the interest of time, do you have anything in addition to add to the comments that have already been shared? Or I don't want to cut you off, but I also want to keep us moving.
Well, my initial comments were very specific to the red line, but I really do want to emphasize that the Hospital Association has concerns about the amount of OHA's pass-through fees, and with so many of those being the retention of legal counsel. So yes, definitely echoing concerns that Jessica has elevated. And I really want to emphasize the earlier request that we had around additional transparency in the programmatic expenses. I do think that the outside advisor fees are important for this RAC to have a better understanding of for the purposes of the next meeting as we discuss these and other program costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's keep moving. We have about 15 more minutes for rule changes before we go to public comment. So I'm going to put a reminder, folks in the chat or folks who are maybe on the fence about providing public comment. If you have any clarity at this point, please put a note in the chat. Let us know if you'd like to speak today so that we can plan our time accordingly. Okay, next section 0055. Preliminary 30-day review of a notice of material change transaction. We do not have any proposed changes to this section at this time. Are there any comments about this section of the rules? Tom?
Thank you so much. Yeah, at the end of number 1, it says if the authority determines that the transaction meets one or more of the following criteria. I got the word only if the authority determines that it meets all the following criteria. Basically, all of those things should be applied not just selectively one. And so that's my comment. I think to say one or more is contrary to the statute and the guidelines. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, let's go to the next section. 0060, comprehensive review of a notice of material change transaction. We are proposing adding 2 words in the red line to add clarification that the transaction may be disapproved or suspended if the parties do not agree to an extension of time necessary to accomplish a tribal consultation. So rationale, if it's needed here, we don't necessarily want to say, no, the transaction is disapproved, and then essentially start over and kick the entities back to the beginning of the process to refile, to re-review, when it could be suspended for the tribal consultation if that is in fact needed. Any comments about this section? Tom?
Sorry, part of my theme here is there's a term in there, it's reasonable opportunity. And be nice to have a timeline, I think. Maybe it's not possible, but I will point that out as vague.
Thank you. All right, let's keep going. Next slide, section 0062, Community Review Board. We are proposing adding several clarifications here. Most of these clarifications are coming from public comment and requested changes that have come up in the past and through the most recent public comment period. So we are proposing, first bullet, adding clarification that a community review board must consist of at least 3 individuals. As currently written, there's not a number of individuals, there's a number of roles, and we want to specify that minimum is 3 individual people. Second bullet is clarifying that no more than 1/3 of community review board members may be representatives of institutional or corporate providers. So adding the word institutional there. And then third, adding that OHA may toll the comprehensive review period if entities do not respond within a required timeframe to a community review board request for information. Any comments about this section? Tom, please.
Under 1A, I think advise the authority on the potential impact rather than just the impact, because maybe you don't know for sure, but it should be the word potential inserted in there would be good. It's used elsewhere. And then in addition, and it's in comment, the idea that a person can have a conflict of interest and be on the board just does not make sense. So there should be language, and I put it in writing, that says, no, if you have a conflict of interest, and if you fill out the form ahead of time and it show you declare a conflict of interest, and it just doesn't make sense to have people that have actual conflicts of interest on the board at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Karen.
Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this. I echo Tom's comments regarding the conflict of interest provisions, and it also seems to me that the conflict of interest provision should also apply to the spouses of people who have the conflict. So, for instance, the wife of an executive in an organization could not be participating as a community board member and sway the nature of the discussion and questions that are raised before the board. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Karen. Jessica.
Yes, thank you. I think the thing that we wanted to highlight is that the agency has the authority to ask us for information, but we would be really interested in if OHA could provide for us how they believe that there is statutory authority for the Community Review Board to ask for information. Thinking back to when this bill passed, there was a large amount of discussion about whether the Community Review Board had the authority to ask the parties questions or whether it was a facial review combined with public comment and providing their expertise. And we believe it was the latter and not an instance where the Community Review Board has that authority. So if that's the case, we'd really appreciate some clarity on where you think that there's authority to do that.
Thanks, Jessica. Sierra.
Yes, we would like some clarification for why OHA is setting a minimum number for specifically the affected community representatives. This seems more prescriptive than necessary, and if the goal is to be more prescriptive around the composition of the community review boards, then we think that this requires a much more robust discussion about the objectives and goals for the community review board. And we also have significant concerns with adding an additional opportunity for tolling. It is important that these reviews be more timely than they currently are, and the additional tolling is a problem throughout this rule set.
Thanks for your comment. Tim.
Yeah, just echoing Sierra's comment about concerns about tolling. It's been OHA's practice to largely toll the review period throughout the entire duration of the community review board review. So, and on top of that, the OHA is tolling even when they are providing a deadline by which to respond. So, for instance, OHA will say you have 30 days to respond or you have 15 days to respond, but will toll during that response period. And it seems more in line with the statutory intent of these reviews to be completed within 180 days for OHA to untoll while the period of review or period of response is open, and then only apply tolling if the parties are not responding in a timely fashion. I think that should apply both to the standard tolling as well as to any tolling that would be available here. I think the overarching belief is that OHA does not have the statutory authority to toll. Suspension is different from tolling, but in a backup scenario, OHA should be substantially more limited when it applies tolling, including when parties are being responsive.
Thanks, Tim. Jeff.
You might be saying something similar to Tim, just not as a lawyer, so excuse me, but the tolling seems like it's not working as intended. I'll quote Congresswoman Salinas on the floor, when this bill passed. This bill is not to prevent mergers and acquisitions from going through, yet in every comprehensive review, tolling has been used to extend the timeline until the deal fell apart inevitably. And so the actual impact isn't those four things we talked about: greater access, lower cost. The actual impact is just that everything's timed out using this tolling mechanism that was never intended to be used this way. I think maybe if there were some bad actors or an extenuating circumstance, the agency needs to hold somebody accountable. Of course, there's some situations where tolling is accountable, but the fact that it's been used kind of punitively in every single transaction in comprehensive review, that it seems because there's no transparency or accountability to get more information about how that tolling's been applied either, is really problematic. And like I said, to quote the Congresswoman, the bill is not to prevent mergers and acquisitions from going through. That was not the intent. It's to do this objective analysis within a 180-day timeline optimally.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, I'm going to move us to the next section. Next section, 0065, conditional approval and suspension of a proposed material change transaction. We are proposing adding that OHA may impose civil penalties against an entity for failure to comply with a condition if that failure to comply is not resolved within 30 calendar days of written notification. I'm also going to move to the next couple of sections. I want to sort of present them as a package and then open up for comment on all three. So next slide, please. Next slide, section 0067, violation and civil penalties. So OHA is proposing adding a new section to the rules that specifies violations and civil penalties. And the reason we're doing this is we want to be really clear about what is a potential violation and then what happens. We want to remove some gray areas. And so this is essentially providing a first line of OHA's response when an entity fails to comply with an imposed condition. So this is when a transaction has been approved with conditions, and now as part of follow-up review or as part of ongoing compliance monitoring for a number of transactions, OHA has imposed a reporting condition, and so there's some ability to provide that monitoring function. And we've seen that there are potentially some compliance issues now that we're moving into the 1 and 2 year follow-up reviews. So OHA wants to be really transparent about the options if entities are in violation. So we're proposing adding civil penalties for the bullet points that are outlined here. So failure to submit a notice, failure to submit required data that's required as part of the conditions and reporting, failure to respond to clarifying questions or information requests, failure to provide requested documentation, and failure to comply with conditions. And then just final note on this, with civil penalties, OHA has a formal process in which we would notify entities that they're in violation and that there is an intent to impose a civil penalty. And then the entity has a given period of time to come into compliance or make a documented effort to comply. And OHA can consider that and potentially waive or mitigate the civil penalty. So there's sort of a warning, intent to apply a civil penalty, opportunity to come into compliance before a penalty would actually be assessed. So comments on 065 and 67. Mark, please.
Yeah, yes, thanks, Sarah. Just an observation. Anytime a statutory regulatory program shifts from sort of a standards-based program to maybe potentially penalty-based program, it would help to have examples, at least for members of the RAC, so they understand why this might be a need to shift, to add in those penalties are provided by the statute. But now you're specifically outlining them. So some examples might be helpful, not necessarily today, but as we move forward.
Yeah, and if I may reflect on maybe, Mark, what you're saying and what Jeff said a minute ago in his previous comment about maybe intent being about protecting people in Oregon and mitigating against potential harms that may come from consolidation, not to say that mergers and acquisitions can't happen in Oregon. And so as a tool, HCMO has the authority to impose conditions to provide some of those protections. And so looking at compliance with those conditions, especially now that the program's been in operation longer and we're starting to roll through, we've seen more transactions close. We've seen what's happening now post-close, and we're able to see whether or not there is compliance with those conditions. So acknowledge the point about maybe that shift in this is a regulatory space. This is a regulatory space. And we want to make sure that the conditions that are imposed are doing what they're intended to do to protect people from potential harms of the consolidating activity. Jeff, and then Jessica.
I think there's been a lot of questions about this, and so I understand why y'all are doing it, and that actually makes sense to me. I would say, like, for stronger enforcement structure, it would be good if we had, meeting the timeline and, seeing some of those outcomes specifically that the program is struggling to get to. Better health equity, how are we seeing that for beefing up fines for people to meet the conditions? Like, where's that same accountability? That's it for me.
Thank you. Jessica.
Yeah, I think the only thing we would say is that this we can understand, and we want people to be compliant with conditions and all of that. We don't have any objection to that. I think the concern is it looks like while there is opportunity for OHA to choose to be lenient, there doesn't appear to be any requirement that if it was inadvertent or if this was a first offense and it's corrected, that it's entirely up to the agency to decide whether to do the full amount or not. There's no kind of schedule or a progressive punishment, if you will. So it could be equally applied to an inadvertent first-time mistake as a repeat offender, and that feels problematic to us.
Thanks, Jessica. Really, if there are specific changes or essentially a tiered civil penalty schedule that you think would be more appropriate, I will welcome that feedback. Tom, please, and then I'm going to move us on to the next section.
Yeah, this is an important area. Some of these fees for some organizations are going to be high, but for some insurers, this is little drops of money for them. They're happy to be out of compliance and pay the fines. We've seen that in the pharmaceutical industry. They get lawsuits, they pay out millions of dollars, and they don't care because they're billion-dollar companies. So I think this has to be sort of weighed into consideration about how this weighs on some small practice versus the billion-dollar companies.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, I'm going to move us to one more section of the rule. We're not going to make it through everything, but I think the other sections are maybe a little lighter. We can definitely talk about them in RAC 2. So here's the last one for substantial comment today. Section 0070, confidentiality and permitted disclosures. So this is a place where we have received a lot of comment, a lot of public comment, a lot of input about confidentiality and how HCMO handles that. And I want to be really clear that this is a place that would require statutory change to address many of the concerns. There are other state and federal laws, not just the HCMO statute, that apply or that may apply to confidential and privileged information submitted by an entity. So we are proposing a couple of changes here. Want to talk through the proposed changes, but also really want to acknowledge that we've received a lot of comment on this, and many of those comments could only be addressed through a statutory change. So the proposed changes that we are submitting for your consideration today. One is that the rule change, we want to clarify to the public that all claims of confidentiality, sorry, I'm going out of order. Let me start with the first bullet. So first proposed change, clarifying that we will publish the redaction logs. So current practice, we receive redaction logs from all of the entities where they have to document and say, we would like this piece of information or this document or this part of our submission to remain confidential, and here's why. So there is a back and forth process, and we have a log of that for each transaction where that's the case. We are planning to update the rule to align with current practice where those redaction logs are published. The second bullet point is to clarify, again, our current practice. This is what's happening, but we want to make it very clear to the public that this is how it works and put it in rule. So we, OHA, in collaboration with DOJ, review all the claims of confidentiality. OHA and DOJ may require additional information from the entity to justify the claim of confidentiality, and the entity must respond to those inquiries or requests for additional information. So we want to make it clear that we're reviewing those claims of confidentiality. We're not taking them at face value, and we're working to make as much information as possible publicly available. Last bullet, we want to clarify to the entities what happens if OHA does not accept the confidentiality claims. So if an applicant or if an entity does not adequately justify the grounds for confidentiality, does not respond, OHA may not accept that confidentiality claim. And before OHA releases any information, OHA will notify the entity 2 business days in advance of a public release. All right. Any questions about this section? Tom. Sorry, I said questions. Any comments about this section?
Yeah, this is good. The DOJ is involved. It seems to me like that should be clear that it's really the DOJ using their expertise that should make the decision about whether it violates the confidentiality statutes or is not in line with the confidentiality statutes, rather than getting input from the DOJ. But it should be clear that the DOJ are the deciders. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Sierra.
Thank you. I think that we'll likely have additional comments in writing, but for now, I think the first concern that comes to mind is that at the Hospital Association, we're concerned that this process as lined out, it will lead to an extending of timelines. And we would like to see a process that is in line with shortening and adhering to the 180-day timeline. Thank you.
Thanks, Sierra. All right, and Tim.
Yeah, I have significant concerns about this change. OHA asked for, and parties are volunteering in many instances, extraordinarily confidential information, particularly about the future plans of the parties, as well as the thinking that goes into the transaction and potential consequences thereof. A lot of the reason that parties are willing to engage with OHA is because I and other counselors are able to give them a pretty strong guarantee that OHA will keep that information confidential. And OHA has been a very good partner in that regard. the concern I have is that OHA's statute is quite clear. If the information is confidential and it's non-public, OHA has an obligation to keep it private. This rule change, though it may align with current practice, from the outside, it appears like it is a loosening of those. And I have particular concerns about the OHA's indication that it will publish material within 2 business days if they disagree. In frequent circumstances, folks are providing information to OHA with the understanding that it will be confidential, and that had we known that it wouldn't be, it would not have been provided at all. Because there are ways of being more fulsome in responses or not. And we should, in addition, have an opportunity, if OHA disagrees with a designation of confidentiality, to withdraw such information to the extent that it was not, in fact, actually required by the form to be provided. And that way OHA can benefit from additional information, but the parties are not putting themselves at risk of having information that they thought was going to be confidential put out in public.
Thanks, Tim. All right, I'm going to call it there. I think this is where we'll start at the second RAC meeting, where you can continue the discussion of the confidentiality changes and go from there. So all of the red lines and the sections we didn't talk about are in the slides and in the document today. So please feel free to continue to submit thoughts on those in writing. Let's go ahead and move to public comments. Rick, we have a couple of minutes for you, and I believe you are our only public commenter today, so please go ahead. Hang on, we'll get you off mute in a second.
Okay, everyone can hear me now. Okay, thank you. Rick Blackwell, I'm here with Pacific Source Health Plans. I know we've been through quite a long discussion, so I'll be really brief. I think Timothy Hatfield said it best about confidentiality, so I'm going to skip what I was going to say there. I think my main point is there's a lot of changes in this that really depend on a really good fiscal impact statement so that we can really understand what the impact will be, not just to units of local government or small businesses, but to the healthcare system writ large. And so I'm hoping that at the next meeting, we'll have a better understanding of the fee studies or whatever quantitative analysis is going into the fee changes, the civil penalty changes, and how those get paid to the Treasury and credited to the general fund. And then certainly within the statement of need and fiscal impact, this is with the magnitude of what we're talking about today, that impact statement's going to have to be really good. So I think I'll just leave it there, and we'll listen for the second meeting as well. Thank you.
No pressure on the fiscal impact statement. Thank you for wrapping up, because I think that really fed into some of the next steps. So let me just end here. If you have written comments, which I know many, if not all of you do, please submit that. The sooner you get that into us, the more that will help us with a second draft red line before the second RAC meeting. We are not planning to do multiple rounds of iteration other than the second red line before the second RAC. So comments by November 13th are requested. After that, you're certainly welcome to submit comments. They'll be taken into account later, but may not make it into the second draft of the red lines for the second RAC. Really appreciate all the comments and engagement today. Really appreciate the clarifications, the requests for clarifications. We will take that back and prepare some materials for the second RAC meeting, which is on November 20th. And I think we will leave it there. This meeting the recording will be posted to the website probably in the next 24 hours. So thank you all for your time, and we will see you on November 20th.
Thank you.